Very pleased to be joined by our next guest, as it is August, which means football time. Here north of the border, that means the Canadian Football League. And for everywhere else on the planet, it means fantasy football time. And here to chat fantasy football is Christopher Harris from harrisfootball.com. Mr. Harris, thank you very much for doing this today. How are you today?
I'm okay. I'm like out of sorts because I have to like appear on camera and like set my stuff up on the funny. So pardon me if anybody who's watching this, I'm like shifting things around, but people who are listening wouldn't have known a thing, and instead I'm breaking the fourth wall, as they say.
Oh, it's fine. My cats make daily appearances on the show just by walking by, and could just blow past it, but professionalism not necessarily my strong suit. Just a quick story before we get into it. I remember a long time ago when we did the fantasy football show at my previous employer. I saw someone tweet out, "Well, fantasy football, we all have the same stats, so we're all just having the same things." And I thought, A, I don't like that was said, and B, that person's kind of right. So I thought, okay, game pass game pass has these like abbreviated games. It's the game in 40 minutes. You can watch them. I'm going to watch all of these, and I'm going to be smarter than everyone. And then I listened to your show, and I was like, well, not everyone. So I guess my first thing is damn you. And second of all, what was kind of the inspiration behind the film watching and all of those types of things to kind of set yourself apart in the fantasy analysis industry?
Well, it wasn't really intended to set myself apart necessarily. I wasn't like that wasn't the goal. It was that I don't know. It in some ways it feels like doing this for a living, which is a stupid job, ridiculous, ludicrous job. Feels like it's come a really long way because I'm a lot older than when I started, and in some ways it feels like it's exactly in the same spot, which is like you know, I feel like I cover the NFL. I feel like my job is to cover the NFL. Not that I care that if I said my job were to cover the fantasy, that's not like a shame thing. I don't care. It's fine one way or the other. But I feel like everybody who believes that they can predict stats, predict what's going to happen via numbers, if they could, they already would have done it by now because there's 7 million of them. And that's how it felt back at my time at ESPN. Also, when I first started covering fantasy sports in general, most people started cutting their teeth on fantasy baseball. Fantasy baseball was bigger, frankly, for a long time. And the way you covered fantasy baseball was via numeric projections. That's really the only way to think about baseball because it's so many at bats. It's 600 something at bats, repeatable events, batter versus pitcher every single time. And it's really, you get great data from it. And even when the data isn't good, we have like underlying data that tells us the actual good data, like batting average on balls in play. Don't pay attention to batting average. You want to know what happens when they put the ball in play. So that's how I covered baseball. And naturally, it's how I covered football. And I noticed after the first few years of doing it that I sounded like everybody else and that everybody was wrong in exactly the same ways. And when they were right, we were all like, duh, of course we're right. We're all right in exactly the same ways. And I think in the end, it's the chaos of football that steered me toward the idea that we're much smarter about the sport and about who's good in the sport and about who'll be good for our fantasy teams if we understand who's actually good. And also that statistics are generally a shorthand so that you can be told what happened in the game. Mm-hmm. Right? Stats are the thing that you go, oh yeah, did he have a good game? Well, yeah, he went 3 for 4, so yeah, it was a good game. Or yeah, I ran for 100 yards, so it was a good game. Whereas if you'd had the time to actually watch the game, you would have known he had a good game. You wouldn't need numbers. You would have been like, yep, that guy's good, and I bet he'll do it again. And the way I came around to the idea that, wow, if somebody could be the person who had firsthand evidence of every game, of every player, of everything, they would have an advantage over the people who had to summarize via stats. So I kind of decided, all right, well, it's now technologically possible. So after every football Sunday, I'll watch every game and kind of just talk about what I saw. And this offends people. They want to know what's going to happen. They want to know, tell me the numbers, what's going to happen, because these numbers definitely mean. And the fact is that football numbers aren't all that predictive, and it feels like I'm not always right, just like the numbers people aren't always right. But I think I If I'm wrong, I'm more wrong in interesting ways, at least.
That's fair. That could be. I should steal that as a tagline for this show. Wrong in interesting ways.
Yeah.
But I've always found the stats thing interesting because in baseball, if you said, well, over these last 16 games, this guy has done this, so obviously he's amazing, you'd get laughed out of the room. And football, well, I mean, this is like fantasy sports, we're basing it off of stats, but it's basically just a series of small sample sizes and then a guy's career is over. Like that's basically what we're working with. That's not the best way to be, I guess, predictive, like you said.
Yeah, stats are a better in football, especially a better description of what happened as opposed to what's going to happen next. Coaches don't care about stats. Mm-hmm. Coaches don't care about the dumb like missed tackle per 1,000 that that people use to evaluate college prospects. They watch and they go, yeah, I can use that guy, and then they use him and they see if he was good in the ways that they want them to be good, and they say, woo, cool, I can use him again, and I can use him more and in different ways. And if we can emulate that, and listen, I would never, Peter, try to say I'm the only person who does this. My goodness, there's lots and lots of great people who think that the way to understanding this stuff is by understanding the players themselves. I have a lot of them as guests on my show. Like there's tons of them, but we're certainly a very small minority, and we're overwhelmed by the people on Twitter who go, dummies, fantasy isn't hard, chase volume. Here's a graph, it says it. Every running back who had volume was good last year. Duh, all you have to do is chase volume. And I go, yeah, what happens if the guy's bad and his coach decides not to give him volume, right? That's not,
right.
We don't talk about that.
So getting into some of the things that you watched as you got ready, as one of the big off-season projects for you, the Harris Football Almanac, which is a must purchase for anyone who is in a fantasy football league. There is a direct correlation, speaking of stats, between the success I have in a fantasy football league and the earliness with which I've purchased the Almanac. Well, I tried one year right before, okay, it's draft day, I'm gonna buy it, and had a pretty good grasp on like 3 quarterbacks, and that was about it. But Josh Allen was quite the turnaround last year, and he is now forever going to be the example of, well, yeah, he was bad in year 1, but look what Josh Allen did. Right. From what you saw, is that turnaround sustainable for Josh Allen coming into this season?
Yeah, the short answer is yes. It's sustainable and kind of unprecedented. And remember, it wasn't just 1 year. He had 2 years of looking like an okay fantasy player, because we care about quarterback rushing yards, right? There's a glitch in the matrix. There's a thing that makes bad players good, which, I think fantasy sports in general were meant to be the thing where you go, cool, I acquired this good player, that means good things for my fake team, right? And then Jameis Winston has a season, Blake Bortles has a season when we can see with our eyes they're terrible, but they're getting stats, and that's kind of what Josh Allen was doing via running. I do think it's sustainable. There was really nothing fake about game situations. There was nothing fake about, they were losing by 30 all the time, so he just had to throw his way out of a hole that he helped dig, which is, I call that like doing the Bortles. It was real from the very beginning. Stephon Diggs coming to Buffalo certainly seems like it was a crucial part of it, but you also just can't fake the kind of deep accuracy and good decisions that just flat out weren't there in the first 2 years and suddenly were. And to your point, the fact that it flip-flopped so fast is going to lead a lot of people to go, that happens. Jalen Hurts, you didn't like the way he looked last year? No problem. It happened. Don't you remember Josh Allen? It happens. Guys figure it out. And they do, but they don't usually figure it out that fast.
Right. Yeah, it's I feel like 15 years from now, well, Josh Allen did that because he'll be the most recent example.
Yeah.
Speaking of guys who we kind of want to see maybe turn things around a bit, is Carson Wentz just broken? Because he seemed broken last year.
He wasn't good. I can't tell you the answer to the question because we need to see him play again. Mm-hmm. The fact is, nobody can really tell you. I'm sure he doesn't think so. I doubt the Colts think so, but I bet the Eagles organization thinks so.
Yeah.
He probably wasn't the worst player in the league, which is what he looked like, right? He's probably hasn't fallen that far. There's something about the sum being greater than the whole being greater than the sum of the parts, or the whole being less than the sum of the parts. And that's a combination of no receivers that were really any good. offensive line that was super injured, had been really good previously, but very beaten up last year. The team just losing a lot. Wentz not having any time and not having enough mobility to get out of the way, and him getting up inside his own head. It feels like the physical stuff that he wasn't doing last year, but he's shown he can do in the past, that usually doesn't go away when you're in your 20s. So it strikes me that we're not going to have to think about it for fantasy right away. Mm-hmm. We don't have to worry about Carson Wentz, and really we don't have to worry about any Colts receivers as major contributors right away. I would draft Michael Pittman. I think he's good value. I think he's a good enough prospect and played well enough last year that as a bench receiver, I'm interested, kind of like 8th round, like I don't need to use, I like him. But the good news about all that is that none of us are going to be relying super heavily on them. And maybe if we kind of have in the back of our minds that last year was just a weird confluence of events, maybe we're willing to buy in a little sooner than other people if we see it go well to start the year.
Mm-hmm. One of the higher drafted Indianapolis Colts would be Jonathan Taylor. Do you see Carson Wentz having an effect on him, either positively or negatively?
If Carson Wentz is good again, it's a positive effect. You want a good offense. You want good players all to be together on an offense. And a lot of times you won't hear that. A lot of times you'll hear say, no, I want the bad offense, because then they got to over-rely on the running back. I call it a crutch argument because the defense is aware the quarterback is bad as well and tends to put 8 in the box and make it harder for the running back. It's better for Jonathan Taylor if they get better quarterback play than they did last year. Phillip Rivers wasn't like ungodly terrible, but he was pretty average and hard time going down the field. I'll just say I haven't moved Taylor based on the Wentz injury. Now as of our recording this, now we're hearing, oh no, Wentz might be good for week 1. Like, let's not live and die with that day by day. It's better for skill position players to be playing with a good quarterback, and Carson Wentz, for however bad we think he is, Jacob Eason is probably worse. So I would say if I'm thinking of drafting Taylor late in the first, early in the second in a fantasy draft, which is a fair price, there's some risk involved for sure, but the problem is you look at all the other guys and they all have unbelievable amounts of risk, right? You feel sick about all of them. If I'm making that plunge and I think it's fair, then I would want Wentz back.
Another crutch argument that I like that is kind of along the same lines as well. If the team's bad, that means they're going to be throwing a lot. So just pick the bad teams and look at that. Off you go, right? And as you've mentioned on your podcast before, we are so very good at picking out the bad teams, which is why the Buffalo Bills made it to a conference championship game.
Right. Well, two problems with that one, right? The first one is exactly right. We're just bad at predicting. If we were good at predicting over-unders, Vegas would not have all of our money, which they do. And the second thing is that if all it required was a quarterback to be on a bad team, then why are all the quarterbacks on bad teams usually not great for fantasy? Every so often you get the Bortles, every so often, but more often than not, those are the guys who wind up not producing anything and getting benched.
Mm-hmm. At the running back position, you have Christian McCaffrey ranked 3rd, and there is a general consensus out there that he would be at number 1. What kind of I don't want to say scares you, because that might be, he's still 3rd. It's not like you hate the guy, but what is the concern that has him behind Kamara and Dalvin Cook for you?
So those are standard ranks with no PPR, right?
Yes.
So in PPR, McCaffrey is my 1. So I guess that's a way of saying pretty darn close. I'm pretty agnostic among all of them. Mm-hmm. They all feel like relatively safe, but maybe a little bit of risk in different ways. I love it that the NFL world just pretends things didn't happen. Like pretends that we didn't all just draft McCaffrey first last year and watch him miss the entire season. Like, oh, no risk there. I would never try to say that McCaffrey brings more risk this year than Saquon Barkley. Barkley's the one who had a torn ligament, and McCaffrey healed up without needing surgery. McCaffrey should go ahead of Barkley because of that, because the risk profile is just a lot scarier for Barkley. But my feeling about McCaffrey is that if, he's small. I call him Tiny Bones. He's a small dude. He's a great player. He needs to be used like Alvin Kamara. You and I put together have the same number of 1,000-yard rushing seasons as Alvin Kamara. Jeez. That would be 0.
Yeah.
He's not used that way, right? He's used as a weapon. He runs, but Latavius Murray comes in and runs a lot too. They make sure they get the ball in Kamara's hands between 15 and 20 times a game, and McCaffrey was touching it 25 to 30 a couple of years ago, and it's just not sustainable. So my rank is like almost a hope that the Panthers get some sanity. Like let's have this guy have a career and not. 2 years ago he played over 1,000 scrimmage plays. It's the most any player has played in this millennium. He's tiny. He gets whacked on every time he touches it. It's nuts. And you're right. None of this was to be like, and that's why a Christian McCaffrey is bad or a bad fantasy pick. And in fact, if you told me you had McCaffrey at 1, even in a non-PPR, completely standard league, or in a half PPR, I have no argument. It's close enough. It strikes me that Dalvin Cook is the one that made it through the season unscathed and is also tremendous. Has just as much of the workload, probably a little bit more of a traditional running back body. Like, it's close for me. Maybe the real lesson is, if I had my choice to like pick draft slots, I wouldn't really want to pick one. You go ahead, just take your favorite. I'll pick 3 or 4. That's maybe what I would want to do.
A little bit further down the running back rankings at 10 and 11, a couple of guys who I like, and in part from listening to the show. And again, in standard, this is Joe Mixon and Josh Jacobs, 2 running backs who I just want to love very, very much. And whether it be a situation or what have you, it feels like there hasn't really been that full breakout, especially for Mixon. What do you see from these 2 guys that still has them like right around the top 10 of your running back rankings?
And I think Mixon consensus is in that range, and I know Jacobs isn't. Jacobs is generally considered a significantly lower pick, and I think what that means is if the draft board breaks right, I'm not going to need to take Jacobs where I have him ranked.
Right.
So I might wind up being like, cool, I'll wait a round or 2 and still get a guy I consider to be worthy of a second round pick. I don't have that much extra to say. You know, the problem with running back and the problem with everything this year, certainly a lot of wide receivers too, but the problem with running back is that you run out of sure things incredibly fast, just incredibly fast. Mixon has had one pretty good year, but never really put it together, has been essentially hurt 2 years in a row. The people who just judge these things by depth charts, they go, who else is there? Of course, it's still going to be Joe Mixon. And if he stays healthy, he's worth the second round pick. And I go, yeah, if he stays healthy, he could be like the number 1 overall player in fantasy. Like he's a terrific player. They don't really care about that, right? They just care. They're looking for carries. And in Jacobs' case, they're looking at the depth chart and they're going, Kenyon Drake is there. I have a long and relatively tortured history with Kenyon Drake. There were times where I was very much rooting for Kenyon Drake. He was a flag player of mine a couple of years ago or 3 years ago. And even last year, I ranked him, I think, RB 15 in Arizona. And he finished higher than that, but it was so disgusting. It wasn't it. Do you remember that Cowboy game? Was it a Sunday night game?
Mm-hmm. I think so, yeah.
Just in the second half, like the Cowboys stopped trying to tackle him, and he had he had like a third of his rushing yards the whole season in that one game. Yeah, like 3 80-yard runs. Kenyon Drake just has the NFL body and has never really played like it. And if that's going to be the reason that someone's going to tell me Josh Jacobs is bad, then I'm probably just going to take Josh Jacobs, but probably not where I have him ranked.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, and Josh Jacobs, it almost feels like that's kind of the maybe not in the passing game, but kind of the usage we want from a Christian McCaffrey, where, hey, just let this guy take over for a little bit, and now Josh Jacobs come in, and he's just going to be really, really awesome for a little bit and still get his. It's just not as much of his as we would like.
And let's face it, that's the NFL now. There just aren't many players that aren't in running back platoons anymore. Like people are a friend of mine just texted me like, I can't with other analysts. And he did a screenshot of Jamal Williams must draft. Why? Guaranteed workload. Jamal Williams, guaranteed workload. I'm like, okay, well, he's not in Green Bay anymore. He went to Detroit and he's had a guaranteed, whatever workload you think he's going to get in Detroit with DeAndre Swift there, he already had it in a better situation in Green Bay. Jamal Williams plays. He always plays. He's just not good. Mm-hmm. So like, point to me, not you, but like point to me these unadorned running back jobs that have nobody who's going to threaten anything. There are like 4 of them. When you get down to RB 7 or 8, do we think Jonathan Taylor's got that job completely to himself? If we think that, we're wrong. Mm-hmm. Nyheim Hines is going to play, and we don't. Marlon Mack seems like he's going to make the team. Jonathan Taylor's who I would take. He's a low level RB1, but this is the league now. To ding Josh Jacobs above others for having another player on the team who can play. Now that's not entirely fair. Kenyon Drake is a lot more likely if Jacobs got cold and Drake got hot, he's a lot more capable of being like the 1A than Nyheim Hines is, right? That's not fair, but it seems like that's just the league now. You know, we're always going to have to deal with platoons.
Also, trying to guess along with John Gruden feels like a fool's errand because I don't even know if he knows what he's doing a lot of the times.
Yeah.
At the wide receiver position, the Tennessee Titans have two receivers who, again, I want to love very much. And they have a quarterback who I want to not have to rely on to help me with their receivers that I love very much. I guess how much does the Ryan Tannehill effect play into AJ Brown and Julio Jones for you?
Apparently not a lot, considering I have both of them in my top 15. I had this exact conversation with Andy Behrens of Yahoo on my show today, as we're recording Wednesday, August 11th, where we counted down our swing players, which is high variance players on which the leagues will fulcrum, like higher picks who could absolutely blow doors and be amazing, but could also completely do nothing. And Julio made my list for obvious reasons. He was a non-factor last year because of injury. He's 32. He's changing teams. He has a worse quarterback. There's a world here where it goes badly, and yet I can't stay away. I think I might have AJ Brown like 8th and Julio Jones 15th among receivers. But what I'll say about that is I also have two Tampa Bay Buccaneer receivers in my top 15, Godwin and Evans. And I actually believe that there's a world where that can happen, where we land at the end of the season and both of those guys are awesome and have been amazing, have been borderline wide receiver ones for fantasy. And Brady was great, and like everybody ate a lot of points, and it was great. I kind of don't believe in the world where that's the case for the Tennessee guys. And because I don't base my ranks on underlying stat projections that I'm making, rather I'm basing them on almost like expected value. You know what I mean by expected value? Like I think this outcome has a this percent chance of happening, and I think this outcome has a this percent chance, and then you're adding up all the. So I think Julio Jones and AJ Brown both have top 15 expected values, but I bet they both don't happen. I bet it's either to some degree kind of one or the other, and we don't really know which. And so, and the reason I say that is exactly because of what you said. It's Ryan Tannehill. And it's if you want Ryan Tannehill to be like a gunslinger that allows two of his receivers to be these massive fantasy weapons, I think you get the Tannehill from Miami. I think you get the wild man who throws interceptions. The whole key to unlocking Tannehill in Tennessee has been play action more than any other team. In fact, historically high amount of play action and super defined reads where he knows where he's going with the ball, and unless it's very, very covered, he's doing that or throwing it away, or scrambling. They're just not asking him to think as much because he's not very good at it. So that's all the way. I mean, I think I have Tannehill QB 12 for fantasy. He's not like unusable, but normally I think you'd say if you're going to have two receivers from the same team in your top 15 overall fantasy receivers, you'd say, yeah, and the quarterback is number 6 or 7 or whatever. And in the case of Tannehill, it's not, because I actually don't, probably those two Tennessee receivers don't both pop like that.
It's funny, while you were going through that, I thought of two different like crutch arguments that you could use for both guys, whether it's AJ Brown. Well, I mean, obviously Tannehill has this connection with AJ Brown. They've been together before, so he's the obvious choice. And with Julio Jones, it's, well, they spent all this capital to bring him in the offseason. Obviously they're going to force feed him the ball. And it kind of just drives home why those arguments are exactly what you call them in crutch arguments, because you can make that for or against almost any player in any ranking system ever.
Indeed. I think my video connection froze there for a second. Sorry. If everybody was looking at me like picking my nose and frozen, I apologize. Once again, the podcast people have no idea. I've completely shattered the fourth wall.
All good. We'll get out on tight end as they're again, talk about you get down to 7 or 8 at running back, and you start to get a bit of a variance. You get to 7 and 8 at tight end, and you're getting very close to like me. Is there anyone, when you were going through the almanac and it was, well, like a couple of years ago, you absolutely nailed it on George Kittle, and one of my dynasty teams thanks you for that. But is there anyone who you see who could be kind of this year's George Kittle, who breaks away from the pack of a bunch of really big white dudes and finds his way into the top 4 or 5?
Let's say though that I was way a late adopter on Darren Waller. He's joined that group of very reliable guys, right? Although I guess he's been hurt for a couple of weeks. He hasn't practiced much this year, but I was very late to getting to him. But I was on Hunter Henry before he got good. Zach Ertz before he was good. I don't have Dallas Goedert would have been the one had Zach Ertz left Philly, and I still don't rule out the possibility that Zach Ertz leaves Philly. I think it's still possible, but at least for the moment, it doesn't seem likely to happen. And it's a tough sell. 2 tight ends on the same team is really different than 2 wide receivers on the same team, because just the fact is it's a wide receiver game. It just isn't a tight end game. And as much as people say, we're going to focus on the feature of the tight end in the passing game, that amounts to, if it's ever double-digit targets to tight ends, we freak out. It doesn't usually happen.
Right.
So it's really tough to I have Goddard in starting territory. I have this irrational hope that at some point they're just like, Zach Ertz has been traded to Buffalo, and it would help both of them for fantasy quite a bit and probably for the NFL. Goddard is the one to me who, when I watch him play, has the thing that I saw in Kittle. Just the fluidity, the ability to not have to think as he's running, the just sort of like body control, sense, hand placement. I really think Goddard has a chance to be a star. I think Hunter Henry had a chance to be a star too, but he tore up his knee and never was really the same after. It's kind of that thing of, like, you kind of know when you see it. You just feel like that guy just looks different. He doesn't look like a big guy, even though he's big. But it's hard. That's a hard action item to follow through on right now because Ertz's presence puts a damper on things.
Mm-hmm. I know talking draft strategy can be a little bit tricky because we're not there sitting watching everyone's individual draft play out. But does the gigantic crater that tight end fall into kind of raise up guys like Kelsey and Kittle and Waller on I guess draft boards, as if you don't get one of those guys, it hurts?
I'm sure people feel that way. I'm not ever going to do that. Okay. I don't have Travis Kelce as a first round pick. He's great. He should be a second round pick, but I have him pretty late in the second round. No, that's not right. I think I have him higher than that. I have Mahomes late second round. Quarterback and tight end are just difficult for me to take early unless it's a super flex league for quarterbacks. Then definitely quarterbacks that levels things out for sure. No, for me, the goal at tight end is almost always to try someone in the later rounds, and then if it doesn't work out, cast around, and see if you can come up with somebody. The fact is, I was looking at this the other day. The difference between Kelsey and the replacement level, let's say the typical number 12 tight end, is like 7 fantasy points a game, and the difference between Mahomes and the replacement quarterback is more like 4. So there's an argument that says there's a little more oomph there with the tight end, but there's also just no scarcity at all. And like Robert Tonyan, I didn't draft a tight end last year, and then in a bunch of leagues I went out and got Robert Tonyan, not thinking that he was great, but just thinking, cool, man, I'm just going to try him this week. And he scored a touchdown, so I said, cool, I'm going to try him next week too. And eventually I was like, I have the number 3 tight end or the number 2 tight end. And that's usually the way I'm trying to proceed in a standard sized league. The deeper you are, the less waiver wire available. Okay, if everybody in your league is taking 2 tight ends and someone's taking 3, then that could be a problem, and I might boost the elite tight ends a little more. But honestly, it feels better emotionally to get rid of some of that uncertainty of the running backs and wide receivers that you would have taken in the Kittle, Kelsey, Mahomes type spot. You leave the draft feeling like, phew, I really avoided some risk, and I kind of felt the same about all those running backs and wide receivers anyway, so man, I feel better. You know what? The fact is, the winning teams often are going to come from the ones that take the scarce positions and feel gross about it, but luck out and happen to nail it because this is the year Mixon goes bananas, or this is the year Clyde Edwards-Helaire, fulfills his promise or something. I can't say that I have a rule about it, but my general tendency, my general want in these drafts is to fire as many bullets as I can at the scarce positions and then make do at the not scarce.
Mr. Harris, thank you very much for doing this today. I know you are an extremely busy man, so thank you for this. Your podcast and the Almanac has been a great resource for me and has made me smarter, and I've stolen stuff from it many times. So thank you for that, and hopefully we can do this again throughout the season.
You'll be hearing from my lawyers, and thank you for having me.
I'm sorry, borrowed. I meant borrowed. Borrowed is what I meant. Thank you.
See ya.
See ya.